Hi everybody, welcome to Ask Mark, our scuba diving Q&A. So you know the concept by now. You ask the question down in the comment section underneath this video, use that Ask Mark hashtag, and then I and the Scuba Diving Magazine subscribers will then answer your comments so that you can get an answer as soon as possible. But in a few weeks, I turn that question into a video that might hopefully better explain and answer your questions so you get a better idea of what we're trying to say. But today I'm answering a question from Grizz about air movement in your BCD. So Grizz says, could you explain or let divers know how air moves in the BCD? I figured it out after ascending to the surface from 60 feet. Go vertical or point your shoulder. I never thought about it. I was never told about it. Yes, so the way that I always try and think about it is that air simply always wants to get to the highest point. And most BCDs are designed so that you're horizontal in the water, with the valves will hopefully often be at the highest point so that where air naturally wants to go up. So most BCDs are designed so that you can vent whilst completely horizontal, but in a lot of cases, if you are struggling, it is a lot easier if you are upright. And there is a funny story to that that I'll get back to later. So yeah, this section here, I'll move it a bit more horizontal, is the bladder is a relatively small bladder of a wing style, and it's fully inflated, so all the air is really full. But on most dives, of course, you don't have it completely full. You just have just like a little bit of gas. Now, air will naturally underwater always want to go to the highest point. So if you like roll over to one side, it's all going to go down one side up to the highest point. And where some divers can get some air trapped in BCDs is if you have more complicated BCD bladder designs. So some are designed like a jacket style wing. Sometimes the air can get trapped around in one of the lobes around your waist if you're like in a certain position, and it doesn't matter how much you press on that purge valve, it can't vent because you need to get the air from wherever it's trapped up to the top of the hose, up through the hose and to the highest point. Another thing that you see a lot of new divers do is after the dive briefing, you're told, or during the dive briefing, you're told, use this button to inflate your BCD and then use this button to deflate your BCD. But what a lot of divers forget is that we usually tell you to lift that nice and high above your head and then press it. Because if you press it like this, in its current state, because it's fully inflated, it is going to vent. But underwater, once all of the air is like squeezed out to about there, it's going to stop. So you're still going to have all of this air because air won't go down to then come back up. So you need to make sure that's nice and high above your head so that all the air can get up all the way to the highest point and then vent out of that. And in a horizontal position, you do have to lift it up a little bit, so just lift it quite high. And dry suits will be similar. You get the dry suit valve on your left hand shoulder, so when you're horizontal or when you're vertical in the water, it can vent out of there. You often have kidney dumps on the left hand hip, sometimes on the right hand hip as well, just so that you can just vent from there if you're a little bit inverted. So then that is the highest point. You can vent from there. It's all just a matter of just thinking about where that air pocket could be and trying to make the highest point that elbow. So left elbow, left shoulder up, and then you should be able to vent. I used to teach students like knees down, left shoulder up, just because that's a real easy way that you'll always be able to vent. But in a lot of cases, As long as you're maintaining it and you're not ascending too quickly, you should be able to do it in a horizontal position. But if you do meet a runaway ascent, yeah, just like look up to the surface, and that will bring your shoulders back and upwards and your knees downwards, and then just vent it, but nice and high. Doesn't matter how hard you press that button, if it's not the highest point, air won't be able to vent. Remember that some BCDs, not this one though, they actually have a pull dump on that inflator, so you get a steel cable that's connected to the inflator. The steel cable runs inside of this corrugated hose and then connects to a valve on the top of your left hand shoulder. And if you just pull the inflator down from your left hand side, it actually opens up that valve and it vents. That's a really quick and easy way, so you don't have to get all that air down the hose. What else was I going to say? Yeah, there was an Apex side mount BCD called the SMS 25. I think it was the 25. It could have been the 45. But its side mount is all done as horizontal as possible. So you're not upright in the water. They really like to be nice and trim and horizontal in the water. So that's how Apex designed it. However, when BCDs are tested to make sure that they're safe to be used on the market, they're tested in an upright position. The WSX 25 or 45, whatever it was, didn't have a valve at the highest point. So they basically had to redesign and add an extra valve just to be able to pass this test for something that would realistically never be used. So yeah, another thing is that some BCDs, especially wing style BCDs, will have retractor systems in it, like a bungee loop or an elastic tape that tucks the wing in when it's deflated. It keeps it nice and streamlined and tidy, so you don't get flappy bits of material just around you in the water. But the downside to that is it can create this kind of pinch point in the middle and create a bit of an air pocket. So I'm not a huge fan of them. Some divers get on with them perfectly fine. I'd be perfectly happy diving with one, but given the choice, I'd dive without one. Another problem with them is that if you rupture the bladder, that bungee is just going to squeeze any remaining like gas buoyancy that you have still in the wing. But yeah, to go back to your question, because I've diverted in about 3 or 4 different directions, air will always try and get to the highest point. So if you're horizontal in the water, it's naturally going to sit in this kind of section up high, either side of your cylinder. If you then go upright and look up towards the surface, it's then going to go up, migrate up to this shoulder valve. And then to be able to dump it, you need to lift that nice and high so that the air doesn't have this U-bend, because air won't go down to come up. You've got to make sure it's nice and high, so up and stretched, and vent that hose. And that's why some of these, or one of the reasons why these corrugated hoses do come in different lengths, so you can shorten it if you need to, so it's not quite as long to be able to pull and stretch. Otherwise, yeah, knees down, shoulders up, kind of looking up towards the surface, you should be able to vent in that kind of position. Another problem can be something called the tacho effect, which is less common in recreational BCDs because they're typically made to fit single cylinders like this one. But when you get into backplate and wing style BCDs, we have twin wings, which are a bit wider. Mine's kind of buried under there, so I'm not going to dig it out for you right now. But because you have 2 cylinders side by side, it would squish this section of the wing, so they're much wider. And if you then take a twin wing and try and use it with a single cylinder, you have excess material and the air just wants to go to the highest point, and it just lifts those lobes up, and it turns it into a tacho shape with the cylinder in the middle, and that makes it quite difficult to be able to dump the gas, because now the valve is lower than the gas at the highest point. So yeah, you really have to get rid of that trim position, knees down, shoulders up, so that all the air can get to the highest point and then vent from there. So that's something, if you do progress and you move on to backplates and wings, Yeah, I've known a few divers not get into trouble, but at least mention it, that they had like a runaway ascent with a particular style of BCD just because they couldn't vent gas. And it's really hard to definitively diagnose or blame the BCD, because if you're not there, you can't see everything that's going on, and it could be user error. It's hard to definitively sort of say one way or t'other. But yeah, most BCDs, they are designed so that they can work completely horizontal. You can still vent. That's why the valves are usually on the upper side. Some of them, usually the kidney is on the inside, so it's closer to the diver, just so that if you're diving in overhead environment or whatever, it's less likely to scrape or get caught on something and then vent. But yeah, you should be able to vent in that horizontal position. But if you're ever struggling, upright is best, because then all the air goes up to the highest point, which is around this valve. But then remember, you've got to lift that nice and high, unless you have a pull dump, in which case pull that down. This one doesn't have one, which is why it's really stretchy. Or if you have a right hand pull dump, just pull on that, because that will be the highest point on the right hand shoulder. But yeah, good question. One of those like foundational things that most people don't know, and we don't always cover in like foundational courses. It's just kind of one of those things that you kind of find out in the water. But yeah, it is important for people to know and think about where that buoyancy is. And we get it in dry suits a lot. One of the skills that we teach in the dry suit course is what happens if all of that air goes to your feet. Because if you like go down to look at something, and sorry, I'm just going to lay this down. If you go down to look at something and your feet end up going upwards, of course, all the air that you're putting in your dry suit to keep you warm and to adjust that squeeze, all the air goes up to your feet, and then you're kind of inverted with your feet sticking up in the air. And one of the skills is learning how to tuck into a ball and relocate that gas. Some divers actually dive with gaiters, which are like elastic gaiters. I can't think of how you describe it. It is like a strap that goes around your calves and your shin to like prevent that air from being able to go down beyond your knee, and that helps to prevent that kind of issue. But yeah, you always have to think about that migrating gas bubble, and that's one of the like issues that new dry suit divers find, because with a wetsuit, the wetsuit buoyancy doesn't really change no matter which position you're in. But in a dry suit, if you do change position, you do need to think about how your center of buoyancy is going to shift backwards and forwards and left and right, depending on where it is in your suit. So yeah, and that's how we actually equalize our dry gloves, because the dry glove is a separate air space, so that does suffer from squeeze. But if you break that cuff seal and then just put your hand up in the air so the air goes to the highest point, it relieves that squeeze, so you can still use your hands. They're not being squeezed as much at depth. But yeah, general rule of thumb, air always wants to go up. Just be aware of any kind of trapped areas of gas. But if you're ever in trouble, yeah, knees down, shoulders up, and that should be able to vent, but nice and high. Any other questions, pop them down in the comment section underneath this video. Use that AskMark hashtag to get yourself and your question featured in an up and coming video. Remember to use that AskMark hashtag, and head over to our website, scubadivermag.com, and see all the interesting things that we do over there. Thank you for watching, everybody, and of course, safe diving.